A question that gets asked a lot in the tennis world is, do left-handed players have an advantage? And my answer is yes. But most lefties don't capitalize on this. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why I think left-handers have an advantage. And I'm going to give 3 things that I think lefties should prioritize in their tennis to win more matches and to win more comfortably. And so if you're left-handed, stay tuned all the way through to the end of the video. And if you're a righty, you're probably going to want to stay too, as you're going to want to know what horrible things these lefties can do against you. Let's get into it. Now, recently I posted a video of Roger Federer, and I'd flipped the video so that he looked like he was playing left-handed. And my question was, do you think Roger Federer would have won more slams if he was a lefty? And do you think Rafa would have won less slams if he played right-handed? This kicked up a real stir in the comments section. Half of the comments were saying that lefties definitely have an advantage, and the other half of the comments were saying that it wouldn't have made a difference. Now, the common argument when we talk about righties playing against lefties is that the biggest advantage for a lefty is that their cross-court forehand goes into their opponent's backhand side. But that alone isn't an advantage, as if you flip it the other way, a right-handed player's forehand goes into a lefty's backhand. Naturally, there are far less left-handed players than right-handed players. And so whether you're right-handed or left-handed, you are less used to playing against lefties. In fact, even for left-handed players, it's tougher to play a lefty than it is a righty, just because of what we're used to practicing against. The only caveat that I would say is if you're used to playing with just one opponent and that opponent is left-handed, then that will negate the argument, as you're more used to playing against that lefty. But when we're talking about patterns of play alone, that is not enough to give lefties a real advantage. What makes a lefty really difficult to play is the way the ball moves when it spins. As if you're like most players that practice most with right-handed players, these lefty spins can feel completely alien to you. This leads me on to the first thing that lefties should prioritize to make life difficult for their opponents. And it's hitting your forehand with more shape. When I talk about hitting with shape, we're talking about the arc trajectory that your shot has. If you hit a very flat and low shot, that has minimal shape. Whereas if you can hit with more height and topspin, that shape is going to be much more awkward for your opponent at the other end. Specifically, there are 2 types of forehand that you want to master as a lefty. Number 1 is a high, deep cross-court forehand. This is going to put your opponent in the most difficult position on the court, as if they're a righty, that's going to be high to their backhand, and nobody likes that shot. The second is a shorter, more whippy cross-court angle. The reason this is difficult is it's going to pull your opponent wider and shorter on their backhand side, forcing them to hit up, giving you a nice, easy put away into the space. And both of those forehands require that arc trajectory that I was talking about. Now, when it comes to practicing hitting with more shape and trajectory, the key is steepening your swing path. It does require topspin. And when I talk about steepening your swing path, the key is to get your racket head to drop slightly lower than it normally would so that you can accelerate more up the back of the ball, creating that height and arc shape. What we're looking for on the deep forehand is this kind of trajectory here. As you can see, that ball kicked up really, really high. If you're playing a righty, it's going to be especially awkward as it's on their backhand side. But if you're playing a fellow lefty, they're less used to playing that shot. Now, sadly, I don't have a hitting partner or a ball machine today, but to practice it yourself, get into some cross-court rallies with a partner. Your aim should be to get the ball rising as it crosses the baseline. If you're doing it with a coach that's feeding, or you're doing it with a ball machine, you can actually set up a target on the back fence to see where your second bounce would land. For example, this shot here, being lower, doesn't bounce that high up the back fence. In fact, it didn't even reach the back fence. Whereas if I can hit with that arc trajectory like so, you can see that ball has hit the fence about halfway up. And so when you're working on hitting your shots with more shape, sometimes it's more beneficial to set up a target outside of the court to look at where the second bounce lands, as opposed to the first bounce that lands in the court. By the way, before you all jump into the comments, I have flipped the screen here. I'm not that good left-handed. I just wanted to demonstrate what it would look like for a lefty. Now, when it comes to that shorter angle, you'll see that I've set up 2 cones on the singles line of the court. I've put one of them 2 meters short of the service line and one of them 2 meters deep of the service line, just for reference. Now, this specific shot, when we're talking about going shorter and wider, we're going to have to slow our shot down. But we're not going to do that by slowing the racket down. We're going to do that by increasing the amount of spin that we put on the ball. That way, we're going to keep the effectiveness of the shot whilst keeping a bit of safety as well. Just like before, you want to do this with somebody feeding you balls, with a ball machine, or rallying with a partner. But your aim is to get the ball to cross the tram lines before it crosses the baseline. This is going to pull your opponent really wide and force them down low, hitting upwards. Realistically, you're not going to be doing that shot when you're in the center of the court. This shot is much more effective when you're pulled out wide or you've got a slightly shorter ball. Just like before, we want a fairly steep trajectory so that we can rip the ball up and get it to travel between those cones. I could do a better one here. Just like so. I'm not sure if those cones were behind me, but you get the idea. So in summary, try to develop more shape on your forehand so that you've got the opportunity to go high and deep cross court, but also short and whippy with the angle. This isn't just going to help you against right-handed players, it's also going to help you against lefties too. And if you're a righty watching this, it's still definitely a tool that's going to benefit you in your tennis. The next shot that you're going to want to practice and develop is the fading slice backhand. This shot is going to be valuable for everybody as it's a great way to get out of a cross-court backhand rally. But it's going to be even more effective for lefties as your fading slice is going to be moving into your opponent's backhand side, again, like the shot before, forcing them down low and forcing them to hit upwards. When I talk about a fading slice, I mean side spin. You want your ball to curve in this direction. I'll show you one here. Oh, that one was a beauty. But just like before, there are certain situations on the court that you'll be able to do this in a slightly easier way. Generally speaking, that faded slice is much easier when you're in a more central position on the court. The reason being is it allows you to have a slight angle pulling the ball wide as opposed to having to hit the ball in a dead straight line. So when you're stuck in a cross-court backhand rally and you get a slightly more central ball, this is the perfect opportunity to hit with side spin. As you can see, that ball curves slightly, moving laterally out of the court, but also stays super low. Now, to execute this faded slice well, the key is to swing across your body more than you swing towards your target. When you swing towards the left, the ball is going to move towards the right, and vice versa. If you've never done this shot before, it could be difficult, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually a really reliable slice backhand, as the act of swinging across the ball allows you to keep your racket face fairly flat, stopping you from floating your slices. So it's actually quite a beneficial tip for your normal slice backhand anyway. Now, when practicing this one, just like we did with that deep, high forehand where we set up a target outside of the court, we want to do the same here for that faded slice. Your aim should be to get the first bounce inside of the court and the second bounce to be in the tram lines or outside of the tram lines. A fun game is to get a coach or a ball machine to feed you 10 balls to see what your high score could be. Every time your second bounce lands inside the tram lines, you score 1 point, and every time it lands outside of the tram lines, you score 2 points. I'll show you with these 4. Ideally, you want the feed landing somewhere halfway between the center line and the singles line so that you've got a bit of angle to play with. Let's see what my score would be. So that would be 1 point as the second bounce was in the tram lines. Ooh, I think that's 1 point again. 0 for that one, terrible. Last one, I'm gonna get some spin on it. Okay, 3 points. It's actually really tough to get that second bounce outside of the tram lines unless you're hitting with some serious spin or that feed is more near the center of the court. But you get the idea. Your aim should be to get the ball to move laterally. Honestly, this tip is great for right-handed players and left-handed players. For lefties, it's going to be brutal for that right-handed player that you're playing against. And for general play, when you're playing somebody that uses the same hand as you, it's going to force them down low and it's going to get you out of that cross-court backhand rally. The final shot to develop is probably the most effective of all three, and it's your serve. This is where lefties can have a huge advantage when they're playing their matches. But as I said with the other two, it's all about spin. And there are two types of spin that are going to be super effective. Number one is your slice serve, with the aim to get as much lateral movement as you can. And number two is the kick serve. If you've got this in your locker, this is like wizardry when you're playing against right-handed players. The most deadly serve a lefty can play is that slice serve out wide on the ad side. Picture Jack Draper's serve. It is brutal as that ball is moving out of the court away from your opponent's backhand if they're a righty. Now, just like before, to practice this, I've set up 2 cones outside of the court. In fact, I've challenged myself. I've put them really far outside of the court. And my aim is to get my serve in play and to get it to travel between those 2 cones. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, it had some lateral movement, but I want that ball to land a bit wider to trouble my opponent. Nearly. This is the one. Now, if I actually took a bit of speed off of this serve, I'd probably be able to get it to land shorter and travel wider. Let's try one here. That's the one. That is deadly. And you may have noticed when I was trying to get as much lateral movement as possible, I was actually tossing the ball slightly off center. This allows me to really carve the outside of the ball, creating as much angle as possible. Yes, this gives it away to your opponent at the other end, but you're still putting them in that horrible position. Now, the slice serve is still effective on the juice side, as you can see it moving away from your opponent's backhand. But the kick serve is going to come in really handy if you can do it. It's much tougher to do, but if you can get your kick serve moving laterally, it's going to feel super awkward for your opponent, as this is something that they're really not used to. To be honest, my kick serve doesn't really kick that high, but you could see there that it had a bit of lateral movement. And even though it's going to your opponent's forehand, it's going to feel awkward to them, especially at the start of the match. One tip to help your kick serve to have more lateral movement is to try to keep sideways on throughout the swing. A common mistake that players make when trying to hit a kick serve is they rotate towards the court, causing the serve to have more slice than kick. Keeping sideways on allows you to get that movement on the ball. I'll try one more. Like so. So with all of those tips, it's going to take practice, and you'll probably saw from the theme that setting targets up outside of the court is a really good way to challenge yourself and that lateral movement. You will find that when you're playing matches, your opponents are going to struggle a lot more at the start of the match. And so you really want to capitalize on those things early on to give yourself a lead. However, beware that your opponents will slowly get used to it. And so if you feel them improving in their game throughout the match, don't let that faze you. Play with variety, keep them guessing, and use that high deep forehand, the whippy short one, the fading slice, and your different spins on your serves. And one tip I'd say for right-handed players, if you struggle against lefties, is practice playing with them as much as you can. Play the opponents that you hate playing against, as you're only going to get more and more used to it. Thanks as always for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.